How much do you know about the Silk Road? And what about the ways food and ingredients have moved across borders and centuries? Well, today's guest has written a cookbook all about it. Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. I'm Molly Stevens, and today I'm here with Kate Leahy. Hello, Kate.
Hi, Molly.
So, the question I posed at the top, how much do you know about the Silk Road?
Silk Road or Silk Roads.
Right.
We'll get into that debate later in this conversation. But, I had to do some research into the history of Central Asia when I was writing Lavash, but I didn't go that deep into it. There were a few recipes that just kind of confounded me, how they evolved in the current country of Armenia, because those borders have just moved so much through the centuries that nailing down, like, how did this yogurt with noodles? There's this dish called like tatar baraki, and it's just really simple. You make these flour noodles and you just serve them with yogurt mixed with minced garlic. That's kind of it. Maybe throw on some herbs. But it's like, where did that come from? How did it get from there? It just felt very Central Asia. There was something like elemental or foundational about some of the food and flavors from Armenia that seemed like, ooh, there's something else to be learned farther east,
Right.
I don't know. Because you've traveled in Georgia. Did you have similar feelings? The country of Georgia, I should say.
Well, and it's so interesting you even say that. And our author, our guest today, Anna Ansari, talks about this in one of her essays, that when she travels to Georgia, the country of Georgia, we still have to say the country of Georgia.
Right.
We have to, people assume you're going to Atlanta.
Right.
Yes, I did have that experience when I traveled to Georgia. I felt like I was touching something older, more foundational and I realized my own lack of understanding. When I saw the title of Anna's book, it's called Silk Roads, because the British say Silk Roads and we say the Silk Road. But I sort of like, oh, spice roots. And then I realized, no, that spice roots is overseas and is very Eurocentric. And I think so much, I used to teach culinary history and we talked about the Columbian Exchange and all this. And now in hindsight, I'm looking back and it was so Eurocentric and really ignoring or, not paying attention to all the ways that food traveled across Central Asia and people and that whole experience. So I learned a ton just reading the introduction and, the essays in this book as well.
Yes. I mean, there's so many layers here, and it takes, I think, a special lived experience and a special mind to weave a book like this together. But let me just say a little bit about Anna so you can have a better foundation, speaking of elemental and foundational movements, a foundation for understanding her work. So Anna Ansari is an Iranian American. She grew up in Michigan, but she's also a former New York International Trade and Customs attorney, which is pretty fascinating in and of itself. But she now lives in East London with her husband and toddler. And she's studied extensively in China, in Beijing. She just has this wealth of knowledge, I think, about the world that she brings into this book in a very, very interesting way.
Her writing really focuses on the intersection of food, family, history, and her new book, which is why we have her on, is called Silk Roads, A Flavor Odyssey with Recipes from Baku to Beijing. And it came out in October 2025 by DK. So
let's talk to her.
Well, Anna, welcome to Everything Cookbooks.
Thank you so much for having me. This is exceptional joy on a lovely Monday.
Well, we're so excited to talk to you about your beautiful new book, The Silk Roads. But it's not every day that we get to speak to a former international customs and trade attorney.
This is true.
Yeah, I think it's the first. So while you were practicing law, were you also writing about food?
Oh, goodness, no. While I was practicing law, I was writing about different, tariff strategies for companies and, how to best import goods into the United States and make sure nothing ran afoul of sanction laws. No, I was not writing about food at all. Although, no, I think someone did try to import some sort of pork product into like Yemen or something. And I did have to write about how that is illegal.
Wow. Right. Well, it is about goods going across borders is interesting.
Yes, that is a very interesting. But you also have a very interesting relationship with food because when you were in high school, you studied in Beijing. You lived with a Chinese family and you were just living a life like a regular Chinese teenager would be, right?
But grew up in Detroit and then...
Yes.
Yeah.
Both of these statements are correct. I grew up in Metro Detroit. The first time I went to China was the summer before my senior year in high school, 1997. And my parents sent me to basically learn about China through a program from Duke University because they thought, this will look great on college applications. China is going to be very important. I mean, this is like,
wow.
Bill Clinton was president. China wasn't in the WTO. We didn't have cell phones really. So it was, a long time ago. But I really fell in love with the culture and the entire feeling of being in China as a sort of Midwestern teenager in the 90s. And I was quite young when I graduated high school. I was 16. So instead of going off to college, I deferred a year from Barnard College, Columbia University, all women's school in New York City. And I deferred a year basically because my parents were like, you're young. We would rather have you go to Beijing, China in 1998.
Then Manhattan?
Then go to the then Manhattan.
Right.
This is the late 90s. This was, Giuliani's New York. It was only kind of starting to get quote unquote cleaned up. And my parents, even though my dad is from Iran, he's been in the Midwest since the 1960s. And my mother is a Michigander. Like, we're Midwesterners. Going to Manhattan was a big deal. For some reason, going to Beijing was not. And I think part of that is because the program that I went on, it's called School Year Abroad. It's run out of Andover and Exeter, and I think St. Paul's schools on the East Coast. It's been around since the 60s, sending sort of young men mostly to France and to Spain. And then they opened up in China. And the year I went was the first year they did a full year program. So it was for high schoolers that were junior year, senior year, and then a few of us like myself who was a postgrad. I lived with a Chinese family, but I also had this kind of like relatively structured life where we went to a Chinese high school and we took classes as if we were high school students, some with the Chinese students and then others with, faculty brought over from the United States. So there was this very, very like boarding schoolish vibe that, I never had.
When you had a host family.
And I had a host family.
Yeah.
So I lived with a family. I had a curfew, I had a bedroom and a bathroom. I had a host sister who was my same age. And there, at least at that point in time, there was such enthusiasm for Americans coming over to China for various political and economic reasons. But also, like, my host sister didn't have a sibling. This was, the height of the one child policy. So there was this great desire, I know on behalf of her, to have a sister, to like have me in her house. And so we developed this like lovely close relationship. And I had this family and I started learning Chinese. And it was during, that year that I sort of first discovered Uyghur food, which which really connected me to my father's Iranian heritage because I had never heard of the Uyghur people before.
Right. And you had known Chinese food, like growing up in Detroit version.
Yeah. I had never had Uyghur food before I went to China, and I don't think in 1998, and I don't think most people at that point in time had. Now it's a little bit more commonplace, and some Uyghur dishes have actually been incorporated into sort of the Han majority Chinese restaurants. You can get like Uyghur lamb in New York, in DC, in California, in London. I actually have a Uyghur restaurant down the street from my house.
Wow.
But I had never had this.
So in the introduction, you talk about this meal you had, the Uyghur restaurant, when you're 17 living. But then you go on to have this very illustrious career as a lawyer, go to law school, go to Barnard, do all that. It's only many years later that you come back to that.
Right.
So
that's correct.
I guess the question is, how do you go from a legal career to writing your cookbook, Silk Roads?
You fall in love with a Scotsman. And you move to the UK.
Of course.
Right.
And you move to the UK and you're trying to get a job as a customs and trade attorney. And you're told by the recruiters over here that the UK is part of the European Union. This is 2014, 2015. Brexit happens in 2016. But in 2014, 2015, when I'm looking for a job, basically the recruiters, number one, didn't know what customs and trade law was, let alone could help me get a position. The firms that I spoke with said, the EU negotiates all of our trade deals. We're within the European Customs Union. So, and like that's our biggest trading partner is the other EU countries. So we don't really have any customs legal issues. However, if you want, you could pay £20,000, so like $35,000, and you can retrain as a British lawyer and start all the way back at the bottom. And, it took me a while to sort of come to terms with that because that was not something I was willing to do. I'm still paying off my law school loans.
Did you like being a lawyer?
Let's just say I liked my job. I found it really interesting, but it was not a career that I was willing to sort of bend over backwards to continue in the UK and to put more money into it. I was already in my 30s and I just thought, you know what, this is not worth it. I don't love this enough. And I know some people who go into law, they are so passionate about it. And we are, as a profession, are very fortunate to have those attorneys with us. I was not one of them. And had I stayed in New York, I was also, I worked so hard to try to get a job here and to continue this career, and it just didn't happen. And what did happen was I became a mother. I sort of had a lovely year of maternity leave from a job that didn't exist. Because everybody here has this year-long maternity leave. I was like, yeah, I'm on mat leave too. Sure. No, just unemployed. But it was during COVID basically that I started sort of cooking more. I've always been an entertainer. I've always hosted dinner parties, even little ones in my galley kitchen on the Upper East Side. People would be going out to Morandi. I remember that was the big restaurant, and being well, or you could come over to my house and we could make roast chicken. So I've always sort of enjoyed that aspect of cooking, and just having parties where I would say, listen, I'm going to make 2 pork shoulders and do pulled pork. Everybody come over to my house and you bring the beer and the wine. I won't provide you that, but I will feed 50 people. Oh. So I've always enjoyed that, but I've never really, I don't think I'd really looked at cooking as sort of, or food as a career related path until the pandemic and starting to cook. And I ended up recipe testing a lot for Olia Hercules, the, Ukrainian chef. She's UK based as well. And she basically was really encouraging of my writing, basically. She said, the way you're responding to these recipe testings, the language you're using in describing, where this went right, where this went wrong, you should write more about food. And so I'm seeing your face, Kate. Yeah. And it's it was a really lovely experience. And she really encouraged me and asked me to contribute an essay and a recipe that we developed for her last cookbook, Home Food. And so I have an essay in there. And that was the first time I ever saw my name in print, was in extraordinary writer and cookbook and chef's cookbook.
And how did you meet her?
Just through the network of living in London, but mostly through the COVID network of all of these chefs and cooks who were trying to come up, I think, with ways of sort of sustaining themselves financially. And Olia ran a number of online Zoom cooking classes. I took so many Milk Street classes. I took League of Kitchens classes, 18 Reasons. I was just I'm just going to cook. I'm just going to not be bored in my house and in my kitchen because I can't leave this house and this island that I'm on now. And one of those many classes I took was Olia's dumpling workshop, and we just hit it off afterwards. And then I took every other one that she had. I learned how to ferment. I learned how to make noodles and roast a Ukrainian duck. It just kind of happened really, really naturally that then once she said, write about this, contribute an essay, I then just started writing more for myself and eventually entered a writing competition out of which I got a literary agent. And
wow.
Yeah.
We love that story because we often talk about recipe testing and ways that people want, how do I get into the cookbook industry? And recipe testing really is a way in. And also that notion that, during the pandemic, so many of us were home cooking, but you weren't just cooking, you were really advancing your own, watching other people, learning from other people, and also not just doing it from books, but doing it, finding some interaction, because that's what we all crave so much.
Right.
No, and that was the thing. It was so wonderful to be able to even, interact with the other fellow participants as well, even if it was just chatting in the text chat while the, workshop was going on. But I think that we did crave that. And I, for one, really also craved travel and movement. And so for me, I wasn't necessarily taking sort of online cooking classes that taught me basic knife skills or whatnot. I was okay, so today we're going to Poland. Today I'm going to Ukraine. I'd like to learn how to make Georgian food now. It was a way of also expanding sort of my actual physical boundaries, but on the computer and in the kitchen.
So it's so interesting because like your book is all about these connections. So you've won this literary prize.
Shortlisted. Didn't win.
Shortlist. Okay.
Didn't win.
Shortlisted. But you've entered a literary competition. You're taking your writing seriously. You're getting into food writing. So let's get into the theme of your book, The Silk Roads. You talk in the intro why the title is problematic. I guess the question is, what does Silk Roads mean to you? And what about this part of the world is so important that you want to teach us all about it?
So I have to say my initial title, for the book actually was a play on the subtitle. I really wanted it to be something along the lines of what the subtitle is, A Flavor Odyssey from Baku to Beijing. And there was a commercial sort of discussion in publishing about why that was not the way to go, that I was not privy to. But I think we had pitched the book originally as Silk Roads. In the UK, and I don't know when it began, but that's the terminology they use for silk, what we in the US tend to refer to as the Silk Road, singular. In the UK, it's just Silk Roads. And this was a bit jarring for me. Like I have a background in Chinese studies as well, Chinese history. And so I've always heard about like the Silk Road. So I was like, Silk Roads, it sounds a little funny, but I can get over it, aubergine, eggplant, courgette, zucchini, yeah. Silk Road, Silk Roads. Like it's just one tomato situation. But it really was initially there for commercial purposes because the publishers and my agent really were like, you know what? People are going to be interested in this. People will hopefully see this and think, oh, this is that storied trade route. What kind of adventure will this book take us on? And I think it does all of that. It does everything that it says on the box. It takes you on the Silk Roads. There's a flavor odyssey from Baku to Beijing in these 256 pages for sure. But for me, over the course of writing it, the Silk Roads came to mean far more and far less in some ways than, this historical nickname basically for the trade routes that linked ancient China to ancient Rome. And I sort of recognized, I think in the introduction, that the Silk Roads is a term that was kind of just made up by a German diplomat in the 1800s. Right. He just was like, let's call this Die Siedenstrasse. I mean, I don't speak German, so I don't know if that's exactly how to pronounce it, but this has never been something that was ever real. Like there was always just this network of routes, not even roads, like trails, tracks, sometimes roads that existed across basically from the Mediterranean all the way through to the North China Sea. I mean, the British Museum here in London last year had an exhibit on the Silk Roads, and they traced the Silk Roads. They said it started in Japan and ended in England.
Interesting.
And meanwhile, detoured to sub-Saharan Africa, up to Sweden. So that's the British Museum, one of the great museums of the world. And they're defining this term on their own terms. They're saying, this is what we're going to call it. This is where these routes went and where these sort of trade networks spread. And I think that is a nice way of looking at it. Like this can kind of mean different things from whatever perspective you're looking at it from. And for me, I just embrace that in the terms of writing it. I'm like, these Silk Roads, well, they come all the way to Detroit. And now we're back in London. Because it's more to me about less, if we can say that these roads never physically existed, they were never set in stone, literally, then we can say, well, they're still in existence and they're still moving in different ways. And what they've always done, what these trade routes and networks of travel have done is spread people, ingredients, ideas, philosophies, art, pigments. I mean, you find literally like Turkish pigments in Uzbekistan and the caves in Dunhuang in China. I mean, this is there's so much that has just been spreading across the world. And so I kind of dorkily look at it now as kind of much like a more metaphysical idea. But however, if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of the book itself, which is what we're here to do, it doesn't spread everywhere. Yes. We're not going to sub-Saharan Africa and Sweden in my Silk Roads book, but we are going pretty much from Baku to Beijing. And those are the two kind of cultural touch points and endpoints for me. One, because of Beijing and growing up and spending so much time in China as a teen and then in my 20s. And Baku is the capital of modern day Republic of Azerbaijan. And my father, though from Iran, is Azerbaijani Iranian. He is one of these Azeri ethnic minorities from the northwest of Iran. So Azerbaijani Iranian food is sort of what I grew up on, and so is Chinese food in a lot of ways.
A lot of the book focuses on the area in between those two touch points. That's not where you're from, and that's not the food you grew up eating. And this book also kind of, it fills a gap in our understanding of, I think you say in the introduction, this is like flyover land. This is the part that's largely ignored. So why, though, did this book get so focused on Central Asia versus, say, more on Baku and more on Beijing?
I mean, honestly, I don't need to write a ton of Chinese recipes. They're out there. And also, I'm not a Chinese person. So, and, to be fair, like plenty of non-Chinese people can write excellent Chinese recipes, and I'm nothing but, greatest admiration for like Fuchsia Dunlop for one, but she's written it. I don't need to write it, but the recipes that I do have from China and here, Chinese recipes are also ones that are particularly grounded in my own experiences. They're in there because they mean something to me because of the lifetime that I've spent studying or living in China. And same with Iran. I feel like you can get plenty of Iranian recipes, less so Azerbaijani. So I did sort of try to focus on some more Azerbaijani recipes rather than particularly Iranian ones. But like, where do you go to get, recipes from Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan? Like, where are these cuisines? Where are these cultures? Where is the representation? For me, I really wanted to make sure that those were sort of highlighted and that, they didn't become this flyover country in between Baku to Beijing. And I think, we know so much. People always are asking me like, oh, so this is about the spice routes? I'm like, no. Those were like over the sea from ships from the British and Dutch Empire. We're talking about this massive chunk of land that has been so crucial to the development of culture, cuisine, and history in the world. And we don't really know any of it. Like, I did not know that Alexander the Great went and conquered Samarkand, in modern day Uzbekistan. I didn't know that until I was researching the book.
Wow.
Like, I had no idea. And I think we think of this as like, oh, Alexander the Great goes to Egypt.
Well, I'm thinking like you wrote this book because you already knew all this and you're like filling in the gaps of your research.
No, I was learning along the way. A lot of the stuff is definitely things that I knew. Like, I deeply love and appreciate the fact that my editors allowed me to excerpt an entire Tang Dynasty poem in a headnote.
Yeah.
And that I had to go back and look at my college notebooks and and textbook to sort of remind myself of some of that sort of history and the literary references in there. But it was really like, I wanted to make sure to represent people and cuisines and cultures and ingredients that were not as represented, have not been as representative as I think they deserve to be.
And when coming up with this theme of this book, you recognize Beijing and Baku as these touchstones, these for you and your family. And then the connecting of it was something, I want to write a cookbook. This is how I'm going to do it. I mean, you tell this incredible story in the introduction about your dad and the melon, which is just...
Right. And anybody who's interested in food writing should really read this introduction.
Right.
Because that story about the melon, I had no idea that there were these spectacular melons in the middle of Central Asia. And now I'm really curious. Now I want to track one down.
There's a melon guy, Kate. I will find him for you because he's California. No one else is going to get him but you.
Amazing. I'm assuming you grew up hearing this story.
I grew up hearing this story about this melon. But I also I think I grew up not necessarily understanding the way in which my culture was linked to anywhere other than England and Germany, which is where my mom's family are from. Like, it was just like, okay, here we came over on the Mayflower, came over through Ellis Island. That all makes sense. And then my dad was just like picked up and shipped over on his own and, moved. And I was never connected. But that I had, and I talk about this in the introduction as well, this beautiful Uyghur meal that kind of that was what made me want to write this book, was realizing as this teenager and coming back to this notion that I could taste in this bowl of noodles in 1998 Beijing, these flavors that I was so confused by because they tasted like home. They tasted like Iranian flavors. And it turns out it's because they were, Uyghur flavors, and Uyghurs are Turkic ethnic minority. And they happen to be also descendants of the Songdians, the people who controlled like Tang Dynasty Silk Road's trade and the oases of Central Asia. And so I really wanted from the get-go to sort of talk about the way in which these areas were linked by food, by flavor, by ingredients, by dishes, and then by people and trade and travel. So it was kind of me realizing, okay, well, I'm somehow connected. Over here, my dad's sitting over here by, Baku, and I'm sitting over here in Beijing. But there is something that connects these peoples, that we are all connected by these flavors and this food. And the reason that these, flavors are connected is because they traveled on these so-called Silk Roads. Right. So it really just like, again, I feel so fortunate because it's like these ideas kind of just kept coming to me together, and then they would just come together and sort of work seamlessly into what I was wanting to say. I mean, I was just like, I had a moment where I think my neighbor in my backyard like heard me scream because I was doing some research when I realized like the Chinese word for spinach, bo cai, which I've known for 20 some years, refers to the bo in it, refers to this Tang Dynasty ancient designation for Persia, bo lingguo, because bo cai means Persian vegetable in modern day Mandarin. Right. But it's like ancient Persian vegetable because spinach came into China via the Silk Roads during the Tang Dynasty.
That's your whole book right there.
I know.
It's amazing.
I like yelled out loud in my garden because I was like, what? But, again, this was just in the course of researching. I was just like floored. I'm like, it's all coming together, and it, reminds us, I like to think it reminds me, and it should hopefully remind others that, people, we have been intimately connected with each other across the globe for centuries, for time immemorial, like there's always been immigration, there's always been trade, there's always been commingling of people and ideas and foods. And so these things that we think of as borders or quote unquote authenticity in recipes and cuisines are also, an amatriciana in Rome is authentic, but the tomatoes came from,
right.
the New World. It's just been going on everywhere always. And I love that.
I can see that being really freeing to realize, but also an era where people are very proud of their borders and wanting to say, we made it first, and this is our food. This is not your food. That's hard to navigate too when you're doing a book that is about the fluidity of borders and how the borders are a modern construct in a lot of ways. So how did you grapple with that?
Honestly, a lot of that has come up post-production, so to speak, when talking to other peoples. But for me, like while writing it, I just decided, I'm not going to let this kind of claimed ownership bother me because I'm sort of just staking my own claim. And I don't, I specifically say I don't mean for X, Y, and Z to be a definitive version of something. Like this is my version of it. Every single household has their own, like if I'm writing an Uzbek plov version, which I have, it's just one of like thousands, because every single household is in Uzbekistan or wherever is going to do it differently. But I also, I did a talk maybe last month. It was, I think, like right around publication time in southern England, and there was this international group of women there, and we were talking about cuckoo. So I have a recipe for what I call a cruciferous cuckoo in the book, and a cuckoo, if you're familiar with it, you're typically in the West, you're typically familiar with it as a cuckoo sabzi, which is a kind of Persian frittata that's so herb heavy you can barely tell that there's any egg involved.
It's green.
It's so green. It's like punch you in the face green.
It's a springtime.
Yes, it's it symbolizes rebirth and renewal, and is typically eaten around Nowruz, the Persian New Year. And I've never liked it, and I still don't like it. I just am not a fan. And I love herbs, and I love using like a chock-a-block of herbs and a lot of things, but I just don't love a cuckoo sabzi. But I love a cuckoo, and I discovered actually during lockdown that there are a myriad cuckoo as well. Like there's cauliflower cuckoo, there's potato cuckoo. And I thought, okay, well, if you've got a cauliflower cuckoo, why can't I have a broccoli cuckoo? At that point in time, my son was like 16, 18 months old. So he's weaning and it's, trying to get him to eat vegetables. And it was, they were run on meat over here. So I was like, eggs are easier and cheaper and like last longer in the fridge, etc. So I made this broccoli cuckoo and he just like devoured it. And I love it. And so I'm talking about this cuckoo in Southern England and these women just start like raising their hands, like 6 of them being like, and then we go around the room. They're like, I have a cuckoo. In my culture, we make our cuckoo this way. And in my culture, we make our cuckoo this way. And instead of it being sort of like a no, it's mine, no, it's mine, back and forth, it was honest to goodness, this like beautifully shared moment of realization between maybe these women who all, by the way, have known each other for ages, but maybe didn't necessarily realize that they all had this shared dish in common culinarily, but just they made it in different ways. That's the one time that I've seen people being like, oh, well, let me tell you about mine. And then just this being like, wait, this is great. No, we all have this. And it's okay that the Yemeni cuckoo is different than the Azeri cuckoo and the Saudi cuckoo. And the woman from Ukraine was like, we have something like that in Ukraine also. And I was like, this is amazing. Yeah. And it was just this like beautiful celebration that, recognized that every one of these women could claim cuckoo as their own and a part of their own culinary heritage without necessarily discarding the others, which I think was really, really lovely to see and respectful. And obviously that doesn't happen every day. It doesn't happen everywhere. I mean, ask people about who made baklava or hummus or, flatbreads. We're not going to, I can't.
Yeah. But moments like that really, validate your messaging. And so let's really get to the book. And your agent is UK based.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. So I guess our questions are, did that affect the publishers that you pitched? And really, was it a hard sell? What was the pitch like? Because it's a complex focus idea.
I didn't see the entire list, but she's UK based and she pitched to a number of American publishers. We got passes across the board and like some really nice passes, by the way, like really like keep us in mind for later things. And I was like, okay, well, if I got to be rejected, this is the way to go. But there was a lot of interest in the UK, which surprised me, I guess. I think it surprised her because I remember she sent out the proposal. And by the way, the proposal is very close to what the book ended up being.
We mentioned earlier the story about your father and the melon. And to me, that seems like such a core story that really sets off this book. And just for our listeners, can you just describe what that melon story is? And my second question is, was that in your proposal?
So second question first, yes, it was basically in the proposal. It was a little bit shorter, but that was sort of like I wanted to make sure that this is the story that anyone who's reading this proposal recognizes that number one, this is my writing style. And number two, these are the kind of themes that I want to draw out over the course of a, full-fledged cookbook. The melon story is... my dad still talks about it and he finds it fascinating that it's made its way into a book and into a podcast. But in 1978, my father and a bunch of other American surgeons, basically he trained as a surgeon. He's a cardiovascular surgeon. He's near 90 years old now, so he hasn't been practicing for a while. But he and these other American surgeons were invited to go to the Soviet Union to go see the advances being made by Soviet medicine. Yeah, he was like, there were not a lot of advances being made. But he was very disappointed, I think, in the way things were run. He was like, oh, America is going to win this Cold War. Basically, there's no contest here. But he was so super disappointed as well, not only in the medical facilities as well as the sort of accommodations, apparently, but by the food. By the food that was served, because I can imagine they were really probably like shuttled from guest house to hotel to, and they weren't going out to restaurants or families to have like home cooked meals. These were presumably very state owned and run hotel buffets. And apparently not very delicious. But my dad at one point in time in Tashkent goes out and he went to a market and he bought a melon. And he's always loved melons. I took 3 other melon stories about him out of the essay. There's a long story of Shapur and his melons. There's so many melon stories. But this one was that he found this melon in Tashkent and took it back to the hotel. Got into this drab colored dining room, started carving it up, he says, and the surgeons were all just quote unquote, he goes, oh, Anna, it was like a riot because he's handing out melon and everyone's like, oh my gosh, this is so delicious. Why haven't they been feeding us this? This is so amazing. And they demanded melon, apparently. the tour guide said, yeah, we'll get you a melon. And then they never did. So the surgeons basically had my dad go out to the markets with them and help them select melons that they then ate at the hotels. But then one of the last days they were in Uzbekistan, my father found what he called a real winner of a melon. And he decided he wanted to take it back to the US to give to my older siblings. And they still had some traveling to do. So he apparently like created this melon from Tashkent, it's like Bukhara to, Samarkand. It's rolling around in the buses, making noise in the overhead bins. And then he flew it back to DC. He had one more stop, right? DC, Dulles to Detroit Metro. And apparently at customs, the immigration agent just was like, oh, what are you guys doing? Why were you in the USSR? Did you bring anything back? And my dad says, no, I didn't bring anything back, except for this melon. And the guy apparently is like, no. You cannot take the Soviet melon into America. Like, into the bin you go. So apparently it was like unceremoniously dumped into the garbage can. But my dad was just pleading. He says he was just saying to this customs agent, please, I've carried this melon across the world. Like, I really want it. This is the ultimate souvenir of my time in Central Asia. I want my children to taste this melon. There's nothing like this that I ever had, like growing up in Iran. There's nothing like this I've ever had in America. And like, I want to give my kids this melon. And the guy was like, yeah, no, Sorry, customs and trade rules apply.
See, no wonder you ended up where you did legally.
I didn't think about this.
I guess that's something that, something you write about is knowing where food comes from, but not just in a farm to table way, but knowing where food really comes from, being at the core of this book. But I think that's just I love the specificity too, for people who are wanting to kind of just improve their writing, just the specificity, rolling around in the, overhead compartment bins before there were actually covers on the bins.
Exactly. He told me, he was like, they didn't get to close it. They just had bungee cords and you could hear it. He's like, they would say, that's Ansari's melon. It's on the move again. And I was like, I'm cracking up while I'm transcribing his, descriptions. But it was just a story, that, I got him to go really into the nitty gritty and to the details. And I wrote about that. But it's a story that I've been told for so many years because, of this deep love of fruit and of food and of what the earth can sort of give us as human beings. And then to, trace that back. I think it's fun to trace ingredients back. I don't think it's necessary. I mean, not everybody needs to do it, but I like doing it. The book does this. I mean, every apple we eat is, sort of a descendant from like a grove in Kazakhstan. Wow. Like, and the fact that is true is just like blows my mind and delights me to no end.
Did you ever consider a different kind of narrative nonfiction for all these stories, or was it always a cookbook?
My initial plan was the melon essay, actually. That was like my first goal. That's kind of what I wanted to write. I wanted to write the introduction in a different way. And that was kind of what I was like, oh, maybe I can get this into a magazine or something and see where this takes me. And that's kind of the story, the outline of it is what I submitted to this Yan Kit-So award that I was shortlisted for. And my agent basically was like, listen, this is all well and good. You're an excellent writer. I think you have a lot to say. Narrative nonfiction, especially in the food, world, doesn't sell that great, doesn't do that well, especially for a first-time debut author. But what we can do, because you do have this experience in recipe testing and recipe feedback and writing about food, is we can, if you want, work on this and turn it into a cookbook proposal. And, I was initially hesitant. I'm thrilled that's the direction we went because I wouldn't have, found out that spinach is an old Persian like ingredient had I not been writing a head note for a spinach recipe. But I do think, the beauty of cookbooks is that they can be so visually transporting as well as sort of like taste wise, you can buy this book, you can go to the library and borrow this book, and you can, see these old photos as well as this beautiful like studio photography and really feel like you're immersed in an area without sort of having to go anywhere. And maybe, if I've done my job, you'll start one of the essays and you'll want to keep reading and you'll want to learn and to enjoy and to be entertained. People say they're funny too. I've been told some of my writing is funny, which I'm like, okay, I'll take it. But I think that it's as a package, this is this is how it should be for the story that I'm trying to tell. Because I think you see it more when you say, okay, a Georgian summer salad, that looks beautiful. I want to eat that. And then I'll like maybe learn a little bit about Georgian cuisine rather than just picking up a book that is just filled with text. And you know, some people can. I'm really good. I love great food writing. I love great travel writing. And I feel like I can sort of visualize, but not everyone can. So I think the sort of illustrated nature of a cookbook really provides that additional layer of movement and meaning.
Yeah.
So yeah, it wasn't the plan.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, interesting. The recipes could really be an entry point. I mean, you could just the dumpling chapter alone.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the structure of the book. There are 9 recipe chapters plus the introduction we've talked about, and each chapter has this really evocative expository essay at the beginning, which you learn so much reading it. But you could also just jump in and start cooking. I'm wondering how you ended up at that chapter organization, and also like where these recipes come from, because then you're like, okay, it's not going to be narrative nonfiction. I'm going to put recipes in this. Now I need to come up with 90 recipes
Right.
Tell this story.
Well, I mean, I turned in like 120. There were a lot of recipes. I've got so much material. It's great. And my publisher's like, that's what Substack is for. Share them along. But so the contents, you know, I'm looking at right now, this was always, again, this is how it was in the proposal. I wanted a salad chapter. I wanted a noodle chapter. I wanted a yogurt and ferment chapter. I wanted dumplings. I wanted some sort of sweet treat. I didn't know what I was going to call it because I didn't want it to be desserts, or in the UK, puddings. But I really wanted to break the dishes down into the sort of more traditional, quote unquote, traditional Western notions in some ways of dishes. Which is to say, I wanted you to be able to say, okay, soups and stews, I can find that here. I can find whatever, it might be vegetarian, vegetables in this chapter, rather than, as I toyed with the idea and immediately tossed it out, doing it sort of geographically.
Oh, yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah.
And it's a tough one, especially when you're trying to sell the story of how these recipes interact with each other and how these cultures and cuisines.
Right. And they don't always belong to anyone.
Yeah. You've got different No, exactly. Yeah, and so I thought, okay, well, I'm not going to divide it up on a country basis. I'm not going to divide it up that way. But you know what? I want to make sure that I highlight the way in which Middle Eastern and Central Asia and China, like, Chinese cuisine, celebrate cold salads, specifically like raw salads. Like these are not cultures, I think, that traditionally people think of in terms of salads, right? Like you maybe cooked vegetables, but there are not even a lot of cooked vegetables in my book. There's like cold salads and pickles and then meat and tofu and, you know, rice and bread. But I really wanted people to know, yes, you can eat a beautiful salad in Uzbekistan, a gorgeous salad in Tajikistan. And this is sort of, I think, a way of making it, again, more accessible to your average home cook in the US or the UK, is to then look at that salad and say, okay, well, this looks good. It's just a bread salad, but Tajikistan. Okay, that's interesting. Now I'm going to read this head note and learn something a little bit about the way Tajiks use fermented yogurt. And so you're able to sort of kind of, it's like feeding a kid broccoli and a cuckoo, right? You're like, here's some hidden knowledge in your cold salads or your soup and stew chapter. But I really wanted it just to be, you know, for ease. Honestly, like if I want to know how to make a rice dish or a fish dish, I can look in here. There was some cookbook, and I really just don't remember what. I was flipping through. I was trying to find a recipe the other day. And I was like, what chapter would that be in? You know, so I'm like digging in the index and like, thank goodness for a good index, right? And I was able to find it.
And not all cookbooks have good indexes because that's another expense. Yeah.
That is something I was very, I think we have a very extensive index here that I'm quite proud of. And I really wanted to make sure, because I use an index all the time. But I love a good index. I mean, if we had room, we would have put a full bibliography in here, but we do have a bibliography. You can access a full bibliography on DK's website. I want to know where to find things. And, you know, if you did it on any other way, I think it would have been more difficult. Yeah. So for me, it was just ease and practicality.
So essentially, like the proposal that you had the structure, and you have, so you always had these essays and then the recipes. And so did you have a recipe list in that proposal that you stuck with?
I did. I didn't stick with all of it, but I did a lot of it. I mean, I think 5 to 9, maybe. I'm averaging about 7 recipes per chapter that I sort of included as a list in the proposal. And then in addition to that, at least one fully written recipe for each chapter. And some of those recipes didn't end up in here, and most of them did. But I really just, I mean, I have to say the proposal took me about 2 years to get together. Yeah, and because I wanted, like, I was in the process of doing the recipe research on top of like the actual written research to try to figure out, just, Emma, my agent, was like, well, we got to have the recipes in here. So, you can't just submit this willy-nilly. If we want it to sell, if we want it to, be published, it has to be complete. Exactly. Yeah. So I think my proposal was like 75 pages long. And I know some people's are much shorter, but mine really, especially because I was not really a published author anywhere else. My agent was like, we are going to do this. We are going to do this completely. I had a number of recipes already fully written in each chapter, and then a list. And then I just slowly but surely continued researching them, whether that was in person in China, in Georgia, in Azerbaijan, in Uzbekistan, or via cooking classes again here. There's a great organization in London called My Grateful. That a lot of sort of mostly women cooks from different countries teach these either in person or online cooking classes. And I became friends with a Turkmen woman named Guncha, and she's the one who introduced me and taught me like how to make dograma, because I didn't go to Turkmenistan, but Guncha taught me how to make it. Really relying upon also these fellow immigrants in the Central Asian diaspora to learn more and to, ask them if they would help me learn and share their techniques and recipes was really invaluable.
You've invested a ton in this proposal.
Oh, yeah.
And so these rejections, while they're very nice, I mean, not nice, but, they're right. Very positive about, they hit hard, I'm sure, but you get the yes from DK.
Yeah, no, I got the yes from 4 places. I went to a 4-way auction.
Oh, fantastic.
It was, I have to say, I think my agent was, honest to goodness, a bit surprised because the no's whirled in real quick, especially from the US. And then there was one taker, and then there was a second, and then there was a third, and there was a fourth. I went with DK for a number of reasons. I think they make gorgeous books and historically have, and I knew I wanted to have an extremely evocative visual book. And I think that we have achieved that in spades. Someone was like, do they give design awards for book? I was like, I don't know.
Yes, they do.
Because my designer did a great job.
I do want to ask, what kind of pushback did you get about platform? Because you have all this extensive lived experience, but in the food space, just like breaking into any new field, it's not easy. So how did you balance that in your proposal, or how did your agent talk to you about your platform?
We didn't, honest to goodness, didn't talk that much about platform. And I swear, I think when I submitted the proposal, I probably had like 400 Instagram followers, and they were probably all kids I went to high school, grad school, and law school with. I mean, it was like, but that was one of the things that was included in there, that I do have like strong networks, though perhaps not online ones that are really substantive on a personal level. But I think the goal was, to sort of take the proposal on, to run with the book, or at least on DK's part, and sort of, over the next 2 years, see where I got. Took it upon myself to become more engaged in the food community here, both because, it's been my first time since moving to the UK 13 years ago where I've had some sort of like professional life and relationships. So I'm like, this is great. They're kind of like friends, but they're kind of colleagues. Like, this is so fun. And so I was just finally, after all this time here, being able to sort of interact with people on a professional level, but also get to know them personally, has been really invaluable. And like some of these men and women have become like really close friends and confidants and advisors, as well as, sort of influencers on the internet, who will like take a post of mine and post it, and then it amplifies. Yeah, I have still like under 5,000 followers. I do think that the UK, from what I understand, is a little bit more forgiving when it comes to platform than potentially like US publishers are. And I don't know, that's just like what I've maybe heard. It's different.
Or maybe a little more willing to look beyond. Right. We talk often about voice, idea, and platform, and the 3 things you need as especially a debut author. It's very voicey. There's a lot of personality. And so the voice is so strong and the idea is so original, putting these things together. So the platform will come.
I think I'm just like lucky. I'm not lucky. I'm very fortunate that, that the publishers did take a chance on someone with a very small platform, and also allowed my voice to shine through. My editorial process was really beautifully simple. Like it was just, changing a few things, but really, I've had such support. My editor, Cara Armstrong, just really was like, no, you're such an excellent writer. We want this in here. We'd rather lose a couple of recipes that you don't feel as strongly about rather than cut down on the essays. And so I feel really, really fortunate to have had that kind of support.
Was the word count of your first draft, was it like 120,000 words? I'm just guessing.
No, I think it was like around 90, maybe.
Okay. Yeah.
It was over by like 25,000. And then they messaged me to say, you know what, we're going to up your word count because we love what you've turned in. And I was just so struck by that and really so honored.
The book's coming out simultaneously in US and the UK. You take yourself on, I think, 11 city book tour. What was your promotional strategy?
I just wanted to get the book in front of as many eyes, I think, as possible. And I think that, that's presumably what every author wants, especially if you're a debut author, but specifically with someone who doesn't have a large platform. I'm not going to post this on Instagram and suddenly 100,000 people see it. That's not what I can do. But what I can do is email every single indie bookstore in America, basically, and be like, hi, I've written a cookbook. Would you like me to come and talk about it?
No way. You did that?
Oh, yes. I think also being a lawyer helps. I'm extremely methodical and organized. It's not that I don't take no for an answer, but I'm just be like, okay, well, let me circle back to you. If you don't have any space in the fall, what about the spring? Are you interested?
And people buy books at those events.
Oh, yeah, they do. Yeah. It was really an excellent adventure. I had just the most beautiful time.
You say in the intro that this is a book about food and cooking, but also about leaving home and coming home. Do you feel that in writing it, you've achieved that goal?
I do. I feel like I've not only been able to sort of investigate my personal and culinary background, but also sort of just myself and kind of understood so much more about who I am and what I am and the different halves of my background and how they can come together and how I don't have to sort of judge myself for sort of not being fully Iranian or fully American because I'm married to a Scotsman and living in London and have this little kid who speaks with a British accent, that, we can kind of be all of these things together. And because of the immigration route that I've taken, this is what I now am bringing home and putting on the table here with my family. So I'm sort of realizing who I am and, hopefully sharing that in a positive way with everyone who reads the book, which I think I am.
All right. Beautiful.
What's next for you?
I would like to write another book. I have a couple of other ideas. I will be, I think, working on a proposal starting this winter once some of these book events slow down. I think that this is, for better or for worse, a book for all seasons, literally. There's beautiful summer dishes in here. There's cozy autumnal. There's celebratory, wintry dishes and spring sort of Nowruz, New Year kind of feasts. So I have at least my work cut out for me, I think, delightfully so, to continue promoting Silk Roads. But I do want to write another book. I think that this has been a really extraordinary journey for me. And I don't want to stop. I feel like I gave up this other career, right? When I moved here, right. I gave up a career and it really, it almost kind of broke me. And in the end, it was for the best because I've ended up, writing a cookbook and I've really loved doing this. But I feel like I've kind of found the path that I was maybe meant to be on it. Whether I realize it or not, I have, placed a great deal of thought and meaning in food since I was a child. And now it's kind of coming out in a sort of more narrative, personal memoir, history, travelogue kind of way.
Anybody who's interested in sort of taste memory and food memoir, there's a lot to be learned here. So
thank you. It brings me joy to write these things and to share with people. I'm just so grateful.
Thank you for speaking with us, Anna.
Thank you so much, Anna. It was so fun talking.
Same to you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. For more about each episode, subscribe to our newsletter at everythingcookbooks.substack.com. Here are some other ways to support the show. Go to everythingcookbooks.com and check out our totes, t-shirts, sweatshirts, and other merch. Or just buy us a round of coffee. You can also leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Thank you to our editor, Abby Circatella. And until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.